She could smell the infection before she saw the wound, the kind of rot that whispered death was coming, slow and certain. For 7 years he'd been her silent shadow, appearing whenever danger circled too close, vanishing before she could ask why, never speaking, never claiming, just watching, protecting. And now, with only 2 weeks until she'd be forced to marry the chief's brutal son, this mysterious warrior finally breaks his silence to tell her 3 impossible truths. He knew her dying. Mother, he's been keeping a promise made in fire and blood, and the wound festering beneath his ribs will kill him before the month ends. But freedom through marriage is a beautiful lie. She sees it in her future husband's cold eyes, in the way his hands already bruise what they touch, in the whispers about the thrall girl who vanished 2 years ago. The silent warrior offers her one desperate chance at escape, a ship leaving at dawn, a new life across the sea, a future where she belongs to no one but herself. The cost? Leaving behind the only person who ever truly saw her, a man who will sacrifice everything to give her what he can never have. Time. In a world where thralls have no voice and promises are kept in blood, one girl must choose between survival and something far more dangerous. The smell hit her first, not the familiar scent of wood smoke and salted fish that filled the longhouse kitchens, but something sharper, copper, the kind that clung to the back of your throat and made your stomach twist. Astrid's hands trembled as she scrubbed the wooden bowl, water so cold it burned her fingers. 14 days. In exactly 14 days, she would become Bjorn's wife, and the thought made her skin crawl in ways she couldn't name. Freedom, they called it, the end of 7 years as a thrall, but her chest felt tight, like invisible hands were squeezing the air from her lungs. She was 12 when they took her, 12 when she watched her village burn, when rough hands dragged her onto a longship, when her mother's screams disappeared into smoke and distance. Jarl Eirik had promised her freedom at 20, and he was a man of his word. The problem was his son. Bjorn was 23, broad-shouldered and loud, the kind of man who spoke over everyone and expected the world to bend. She'd seen him break a thrall's wrist once for spilling mead. He laughed about it later, like it was nothing. The bowl slipped from her grip, clattering against the stone floor. No one looked. Up. That was the trick she'd learned early, how to exist without taking up space, how to move through rooms like morning mist. But someone always noticed. Always. She felt his eyes before she saw him, that prickling sensation at the base of her skull, the one that had followed her for years now. Astrid straightened slowly, forcing her breathing to steady, and glanced toward the far corner of the hall. There, Halvard, leaning against the timber wall near the mead barrels, arms crossed, face half shadowed by the firelight. He wasn't looking at her now, but she knew. She always knew. 7 years she'd been here, and in all that time, Halvard had never spoken a single word to her. Not one. But he was always there. When Bjorn's friends got too drunk and their hands wandered where they shouldn't. When the other warriors shoved past her carrying firewood. When the winter cold made her fingers so numb she could barely hold the kitchen knife. Halvard would appear, silent as snowfall, and somehow the danger would pass. A look, a shifted position, his presence like a wall between her and whatever threatened. She'd started noticing the pattern 2 years ago. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then she thought maybe he was watching her for some other reason, some darker purpose that made her pulse quicken with fear. But his eyes never held that hungry look other men wore. They were just watching, protecting. Why? She had no idea, and the not knowing had burrowed into her chest and made a home there, right next to the fear of Bjorn and the ache of her lost childhood. Halvard pushed off the wall now, moving through the crowded hall with that strange grace large men sometimes possessed. He was taller than most, shoulders marked with the thick ropes of muscle that came from wielding axes and oars. His face bore scars, thin white lines that caught the firelight. One ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw. Another crossed his throat, a hair's width from what should have been a killing blow. His beard was darker than most Norsemen, almost black, shot through with gray despite him being maybe 35 summers old. Some of the kitchen women whispered he was handsome. Astrid tried not to think about it. He crossed toward the eastern archway, the one that led to the weapons storage. But his path took him close. Too close to be accident. As he passed, his eyes met hers for just a heartbeat. Something flickered there, something that made her breath catch. Then he stumbled. Just slightly, just enough that his hand shot out to the table edge for balance. The movement was wrong, too sudden, too needed. Astrid's chest went tight again, but different this time. That wasn't the careful, controlled movement she'd seen from him for 7 years. That was weakness. That was pain being hidden. Stop gawking and get back to work. The voice cracked like a whip. Astrid jerked her attention back to find Inga, the head cook, glaring at her with those small, mean eyes. Daydreaming won't make you any less useless. Yes, mistress. The words came automatic, shaped by years of survival. Keep your head down. Don't argue. Don't give them reasons. But as she bent back to the washing basin, her mind was racing. Something was wrong with Halvard. She'd seen him take blows in the training yard that would drop other men, and he'd barely flinched. Whatever was happening now, he was hiding it, and hiding it badly. The great doors burst open, letting in a blast of autumn. Wind that made the hearth fire dance. Bjorn strode in, still wearing his riding furs, snow melting in his yellow beard. 3 of his friends followed, all of them loud, all of them already half drunk, though the sun hadn't reached its peak. Astrid felt herself go very still, the way rabbits froze when hawks circled overhead. "Father!" Bjorn's voice boomed across the hall. Jarl Eirik looked up from where he sat, discussing trade routes with his advisors. "The preparations are set. 14 days from now, I'll have a wife." The way he said wife made Astrid's skin prickle, like he was talking about acquiring a new horse, something to own, something to break to his will. Good. Eric's voice was measured, controlled, everything his son wasn't. The union will strengthen our standing. Her loyalty, purchased with freedom, will serve us well. Purchased. The word sat heavy in Astrid's stomach. 7 years of servitude, payment for the gift of marrying their son. As if she should be grateful. As if this wasn't just another kind of chain. Bjorn's gaze swept the hall, and Astrid quickly ducked her head, scrubbing at a bowl that was already clean. "Please don't notice me. Please don't." "Astrid." His voice cut through the noise. Her heart dropped. "Come here." There was no choice. There was never a choice. She set down the bowl with shaking hands and crossed the hall, aware of every eye following her. The walk felt like miles. When she reached him, she kept her gaze on the rushes scattered. Across the floor, on his mud-caked boots. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." She forced her chin up. Bjorn was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those pale blue eyes that reminded her of winter ice. Cold, hard, unforgiving. 14 days, he said, reaching out to touch her cheek. His hand was rough, calloused, and she had to fight every instinct not to flinch away. "Then you'll belong to me properly. No more sleeping with the other thralls. No more kitchen work." His thumb traced her. Jawline and bile rose in her throat. "You'll have responsibilities, a husband's bed to warm, sons to bear." The hall had gone quiet, everyone watching, everyone waiting to see what she'd do. Astrid forced her voice to work. "I am honored, my lord." The words tasted like ash. Bjorn's smile widened. "Of course you are." He released her face and turned back to his friends. "Did you hear that? She's honored." They laughed, that ugly, knowing laughter that made her feel small and dirty and trapped. She was dismissed. She knew it without being told. Astrid turned and walked back toward the kitchens, her face burning, her eyes stinging with tears she absolutely could not let fall. Not here. Not where they could see. She pushed through the side door into the cold storage room, where the salted meat hung from hooks and the temperature dropped enough to make her breath visible. Only then did she let herself shake, her whole body trembling like leaves before a storm. 14 days. 14 days. And her life would become something worse than slavery. At least now she was invisible. Bjorn's wife would never be invisible, would never have a moment's peace, would never. You need to breathe. Astrid spun around, heart hammering. Halvard stood in the doorway, his large frame blocking the light from the hall beyond. When had he followed her? How had she not heard him? For 7 years, silence. 7 years of watching and protecting and never, ever speaking. And now, you're pale, he said, and his voice was lower than she'd expected. Rough from disuse, maybe, or something else. Breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. She did it without thinking, following the command because her body didn't know what else to do. In, out, in, out. Slowly, the shaking subsided. Why? Her voice cracked. She tried again. Why are you talking to me? Halvard's jaw tightened. In the dim light of the storage room, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features. The pain he was trying to hide, and something else, something that looked almost like regret. Because, he said quietly, we don't have much time left. The words hung in the frozen air between them like breath made solid. We don't have much time left. Astrid's mind scrambled to make sense of it, to understand why this man who'd been silent for 7 years was suddenly speaking, and why his voice carried the weight of something final, something ending. I don't understand, she whispered, pressing her back against the cold stone wall. The hanging meat swayed slightly in the draft, creating shadows that danced across Halvard's scarred face. Time for what? He took a step closer, and she noticed the way he favored his left side, the way his breathing seemed just slightly labored, like each inhale cost him something. Up close, she could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cold, the gray tinge beneath his weathered skin. I knew your mother. The words came out rough, like they'd been locked away too long and had grown rusty. Freya. That was her name, wasn't it? Astrid's legs nearly gave out. No one here knew her mother's name. No one cared about the woman who died in smoke and screams 7 years ago. She'd been just another casualty of a raid, another body left behind when the longships sailed away with their human cargo. How? Her throat closed around the word. How do you know that? Halvard's hand moved to his side, pressing there briefly before he caught himself and let it drop. I was there, at your village. I was part of the raiding party. He paused, and something like pain crossed his features. Not physical this time, something deeper. I found you hiding in the root cellar beneath your home. You were 12, terrified, covered in ash. The memories came rushing back. The darkness of that cellar, the way the floorboards above had creaked with the weight of men searching. Her own hand pressed over her mouth to keep from crying out. Tears streaming down her face, her mother's last words still echoing in her ears. Run, Astrid. Hide and don't come out. I pulled you out. Halvard continued, his voice quieter now. You fought me, scratched my face. He touched the scar on his jaw, the one she'd always noticed. Drew blood, but you were so small, and I was... He trailed off, jaw clenching. I carried you to the ship. You screamed for your mother the whole way. Why are you telling me this? Astrid's voice broke. Why now? Because your mother wasn't dead yet when I found you. She was in the house, trapped under a fallen beam. The fire was spreading fast, and she knew she wasn't getting out. Halvard's eyes met hers, and she saw something she'd never expected to find there. Guilt. Raw and bleeding after all these years. She made me promise. With her last breaths, smoke filling her lungs, she grabbed my arm and made me swear on my honor that I would protect you, that I would make sure you survived. The storage room spun. Astrid reached out blindly, her hand finding the rough wood of a support beam. Her mother's face flashed before her eyes, beautiful even through the ash and blood, strong, fierce, loving. She knew she was dying, Astrid whispered. She told me to run, to hide. She never said... Tears spilled over, hot against her frozen cheeks. She never said goodbye. She did. Halvard's voice was gentle now, almost tender. She said, "Tell Astrid I love her. Tell her to be brave. Tell her the gods will watch over her." Then she made me swear the oath. He swallowed hard. "I've kept that promise for 7 years. Watched over you. Made sure no harm came to you. Stepped between you and danger whenever it appeared. All those times. All those moments when he'd materialized out of nowhere. A silent guardian she'd never understood. It had been duty. A promise made to a dying woman. Not affection, not care, just honor. The realization should have hurt, but instead it felt like something clicking into place. Vikings lived and died by their oaths. Honor meant everything. And Halvard had kept his word, even when it cost him. Even when watching meant never speaking, never connecting, just being a ghost at the edges of her life. "Why tell me now?" she asked again, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "After all this time, why break your silence?" Halvard's face hardened. He looked away, toward the doorway, toward the sounds of the hall beyond. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because in 14 days you'll belong to Bjorn. You'll be his wife, under his protection. My oath to your mother will be fulfilled." He paused, and that strange pain flickered across his features again. "And because I'm dying." The words hit her like a physical blow. Astrid's breath caught in her chest, her heart stuttering. "What?" "There was a skirmish 3 weeks ago. Border dispute with a neighboring clan. I took a blade to the side." His hand moved to his ribs again, pressing there with more purpose this time. "It seemed shallow. I bounded and kept fighting, but it festered. The wound won't heal. The infection spreads deeper each day. Have you seen the healer?" Astrid stepped forward without thinking, her hands reaching toward him before she caught herself. "Surely someone can—" "I've seen her. There's nothing to be done." Halvard's voice was matter of fact, accepting. "The poison is too deep. She gives me weeks, maybe a month if the gods are merciful." His eyes found hers again. "I wanted to keep my promise until you were safe, until Bjorn claimed you as his wife. Then I could die with honor intact." Astrid's mind reeled. This man, this silent guardian who'd protected her for 7 years, was dying. Slowly, painfully. And he'd said nothing because he was determined to see his duty through to the end. "You can't," she heard herself say. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere she didn't recognize. "You can't just accept this." "What choice do I have?" Halvard's lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The wound is mortal. The healer said as much. All I can do is choose how I spend the time I have left. And you choose to spend it watching me marry a man who terrifies me?" The words burst out before she could stop them. "You fulfill your oath by handing me over to someone who will hurt me in ways your protection can never prevent?" Halvard flinched like she'd struck him. "Bjorn is his father's son. When you're his wife, you'll have status, protection under law. You'll no longer be a thrall. I'll be property of a different kind." Astrid's voice shook with an emotion she couldn't name. Anger, grief, something else entirely. "You know what he is. I've seen you watching when he gets rough with the servants. When he drinks too much and his hands turn cruel. You've seen it too. It's not my place to interfere with." "Your place?" She stepped closer, close enough to see the fever brightness in his eyes. The way pain had carved lines deeper around his mouth. "Your place has been at my shoulder for 7 years. Your place has been keeping me safe. And now you're telling me that ends because some ceremony makes me another man's problem?" Halvard's jaw worked silently. She could see the conflict playing across his features, the war between duty and something else. Something he wasn't saying. "The oath was to keep you alive," he said finally, quietly. "To protect you from harm. Your mother made me swear it, and I have. You've survived. You'll be free of bondage. The promise is kept. My mother also told me to be brave." Astrid's voice steadied, even as her heart raced. "Do you think she meant brave enough to endure, or brave enough to fight?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to voice. From the hall beyond, someone laughed. The sound of normal life continuing while everything in this cold storage room felt like it was shifting, cracking, reforming into something new. Halvard opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly his face went gray. He staggered, his hand shooting out to brace against the wall. The movement pulled his tunic tight across his torso, and Astrid saw it. The dark stain spreading beneath the fabric. Fresh blood. The wound was bleeding again. "You need to sit down," she said, reaching for him without hesitation this time. "I need to get back before someone notices. Halvard." She said his name for the first time. Ever. And the sound of it seemed to stop him cold. "Sit down." He sat. Not because she commanded it, but because his body gave him no choice. Halvard lowered himself onto a wooden crate with the careful movements of someone trying not to show how much it hurt. His breath came shorter now, shallow and tight. Astrid watched the color drain further from his face, watched sweat bead along his hairline despite the cold that made her own fingers ache. "Let me see it," she said, kneeling in front of him. The earthen floor was hard and cold beneath her knees, but she barely noticed. "You shouldn't. I've worked in these kitchens for 7 years. I've cleaned and dressed wounds before, hunting accidents, training injuries, burns from the fires." Her hands moved to the hem of his tunic, hesitating just slightly before she looked up at him. "I need to see how bad it is." Halvard held her gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them in that look, something that made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Finally, he nodded. His hands moved to help lift the heavy wool, but even that simple motion made him wince. The smell hit her first. Not the copper of fresh blood, but something worse. Something rotten. Sweet and putrid at the same time. The unmistakable scent of flesh dying while the body still lived. Astrid's stomach turned, but she forced herself to look. The wound ran along his left side, just below his ribs. Someone had stitched it, but the flesh around the blackened thread was angry and swollen. Red streaks radiated outward like twisted branches, the sure sign of poison spreading through blood. Fluid oozed from between the stitches, yellowish and thick. The skin felt hot when she carefully touched the edge of the wound, fever heat that radiated outward. "How long has it been like this?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "It started getting worse about 5 days ago," the healer said. "I don't care what the healer said." Astrid looked up at him, and she saw surprise flicker across his pain-tight features. "This needs to be cleaned. Properly. The stitches need to come out so the poison can drain, and you need yarrow and honey packs to draw out the infection. The healer already tried." "Did she?" Astrid's hands hovered over the wound, not touching, just assessing. Or did she look at a warrior too proud to show weakness and give him something for the pain, knowing he'd refuse anything more? Halvard's silence was answer enough. She'd seen this before. Men who wouldn't admit they were hurt until it was too late. Warriors who'd rather die than appear weak in front of their brothers. The kitchen women talked about it sometimes, shaking their heads over the stubborn foolishness of it all. How many had died from wounds that could have been treated if only pride hadn't stood in the way? "The supplies I need are in the main kitchen," Astrid said, already calculating what she could take without drawing. "Attention, but I can't work on you here. Someone will come looking for me or for stored meat or..." She stopped, thinking. "Do you have your own dwelling? Or do you sleep in the warrior's hall? I have a small house, near the eastern edge of the settlement." Halvard's breathing was labored now, each word an effort. "But Astrid, you can't risk this. If Bjorn finds out you've been alone with me, unchaperoned, then we make sure he doesn't find out." She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Can you walk?" "I've walked with worse." "That's not what I asked." A ghost of a smile touched his lips despite the pain. "Yes, I can walk. Tonight then, after the evening meal, when everyone's occupied with drinking and gambling." Astrid's mind raced through the logistics. "I'll tell Inga I'm going to empty the slop buckets. It'll give me maybe half an hour before anyone notices I'm gone. Is that enough time to reach your house?" "More than enough. It's only a few minutes' walk." Halvard started to stand, then stopped. his hand pressing against his side again. "Why are you doing this?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the warrior and the guardian to the man beneath. A man who'd kept a promise to a dying woman for 7 years, who'd protected a frightened child without asking anything in return, who'd watched over her in silence because speaking would have crossed boundaries he didn't dare breach. "Because you kept your oath to my mother," she said quietly. "And because I won't watch you die when there's something I can do to help. I'm still going to die." His voice was soft, but there was something in it. Not quite hope, but maybe acceptance of a different kind. "Even if you manage to fight off this infection, I have weeks, a month at most. Then let's not waste them." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. She wasn't sure where they came from, this sudden fierceness, this refusal to simply accept what seemed inevitable. "My mother told me to be brave." Maybe this is what she meant. Halvard studied her face, and she wondered what he saw there. Not the terrified 12-year-old he'd pulled from a burning village. Not the silent thrall who'd learned to make herself invisible. Something else. Someone she was just beginning to recognize herself. "Tonight, then," he said finally, pulling his tunic back down with careful movements. "After the evening meal." "But Astrid," he caught her hand, his calloused fingers warm despite the cold. "If anyone asks, if there's any danger to you, you tell them I forced you, that I threatened you. Your safety is worth more than my honor." She looked down at their joined hands. His were so much larger than hers, scarred from years of wielding weapons and working ropes. Strong hands that had killed, she had no doubt, but also hands that had protected, that had kept promises, that were gentle now, holding hers like something precious. "No one's going to find out," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Trust me." He released her hand, and the loss of warmth made her shiver. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Halvard stood slowly, testing his weight, making sure he could walk without drawing attention to his weakness. The effort it took showed in every line of his body, but his face smoothed into careful neutrality. The mask of a warrior who showed nothing. "Be careful," he said. "Bjorn's been watching you more closely these past few days. He's possessive of things he considers his." The reminder sent ice through her veins. 14 days. Less than that now. 13 days until she became property. 13 days to what? Help Halvard heal? Watch him die more slowly? She didn't know. She only knew that doing nothing felt impossible. "I'm always careful," she replied. "That's how thralls survive." Halvard moved toward the door, each step measured and controlled. But before he left, he paused and looked back. At her. The firelight from the hall beyond caught his profile, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the way pain had carved shadows beneath his eyes. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said quietly. "The woman you've become, the strength you carry." He paused. "I thought you should know that." Then he was gone, disappearing into the noise and light of the hall, leaving Astrid alone in the cold storage room, with her heart hammering and her hands shaking, and the dawning realization that something fundamental had shifted in the space of a single conversation. She pressed her palm against the cold stone wall, feeling the rough texture ground her. Tonight. She would help him tonight. And maybe, just maybe, she could save the man who'd spent 7 years saving her. The door creaked open again, and Astrid's heart leaped into her throat. But it was only Inga, her pinched face tight with annoyance. "There you are. Stop hiding and get back to work. Those dishes won't wash themselves. And we've got bread to prepare for tomorrow's meal." Her sharp eyes narrowed. "And wipe that look off your face. Daydreaming won't change what's coming in 13 days. 13 days. The number echoed in Astrid's mind as she followed Inga back into the kitchen's heat and chaos. 13 days until one life ended and another began. But maybe if she was brave enough, if she was careful enough, she could change more than Inga thought possible. She just had to figure out how. The evening meal stretched endlessly. Astrid moved through the crowded hall like a ghost, refilling cups and clearing platters while her mind raced ahead to what came next. She'd managed to slip yarrow leaves, clean linen strips, and a small clay pot of honey into a worn leather satchel hidden behind the grain barrels. Each theft had made her heart pound, but no one noticed. They never did. Thralls were furniture, present but invisible. Bjorn sat at the high table beside his father, already drunk despite the sun. Having barely set, his laughter boomed across the hall, too loud, too aggressive. Each burst of sound made Astrid's shoulders tense. She kept her head down, her movements efficient, trying not to draw his attention. But she could feel his gaze tracking her sometimes, heavy and possessive, like a predator watching prey it had already claimed. "More mead," he called out, slamming his cup against the table. The wood trembled. Several nearby conversations faltered. Astrid lifted the heavy pitcher and crossed toward him, every instinct screaming to move slowly, carefully. Don't spill. Don't give him a reason. She reached his side and began to pour, the amber liquid catching the firelight. 13 days, Bjorn said, loud enough for half the hall to hear. His hand shot out and caught her wrist, stopping the pour midstream. Mead splashed onto the table. 13 days and you'll pour my cup every morning as my wife, in our bed, before I take what's mine. The crude implication made. Several warriors laugh. Astrid's face burned, but she kept her eyes down. His grip tightened, fingers digging into the delicate bones of her wrist, hard enough to bruise. "Yes, my lord," she whispered, because any other answer would be worse. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." She raised her eyes to his face. His smile was sharp, predatory. There was something in his expression that went beyond simple cruelty, something that looked almost like testing, seeing how far he could push, how much she would endure. "That's better." His thumb stroked the inside of her wrist, a mockery of tenderness. "You'll learn to look at me properly soon enough, to anticipate what I want, what I need." His voice dropped lower, intimate and threatening at once. "I'm going to enjoy teaching you, Bjorn." Jarl Eirik's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Release the girl. This isn't the time or place." For a heartbeat, Bjorn's grip tightened further. Astrid bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. Then he released her with a dismissive flick of his hand, turning back to his father as if she'd ceased to exist. "Forgive me, father. I'm simply eager for what's to come." Astrid backed away, cradling her throbbing wrist against her chest. She could feel eyes on her from around the hall, pity from some, amusement from others, and from the far corner near the weapons rack, Halvard's gaze. Even from across the crowded space, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way. His jaw was locked tight. His hand rested on the table in front of him, knuckles white. Their eyes met. She gave the smallest shake of her head. "Don't. Not here. Not now." Whatever he was thinking, whatever protective instinct was warring inside him, acting on it would only make everything worse. He understood. She saw him force his posture to relax, saw him deliberately look away and take a long drink from his cup. But the muscle in his jaw still twitched. Inga appeared at Astrid's elbow, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the kitchen. "Stop drawing attention to yourself," she hissed. "You think mooning about will change anything? In 13 days you'll be his, and all the wishing in the world won't alter that. Now take the slop buckets out. They're overflowing and stinking up my kitchen." Perfect. The opportunity she'd been waiting for. Astrid nodded quickly, grateful for once for Inga's sharp tongue and impatience. She grabbed the 2 heavy wooden buckets, each filled with food scraps and refuse, and headed for the side door. The weight made her injured wrist throb, but she gritted her teeth and pushed through. The cold night air hit her like a slap after the hall's oppressive heat. Autumn was dying into winter, and the darkness came early now. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The settlement was quieter at night, most people clustered in their homes or the hall, seeking warmth and company. Astrid dumped the buckets in the refuse pit behind the kitchens, then quickly retrieved the hidden satchel. Her hands shook as she slung it over her shoulder. This was it, the moment where everything could go wrong. If someone saw her heading away from the settlement, if Bjorn decided to follow her, if Inga came looking sooner than expected. But she thought of Halvard's gray face, the fever heat radiating from that infected wound, and her feet moved before fear could stop them. The eastern edge of the settlement wasn't far, but every shadow felt like it might hide watching eyes. Astrid kept to the edges of buildings, moving quickly but not running. Running drew attention. She passed the blacksmith's forge, cold now, and the weaver's house where candlelight flickered behind oiled hide windows. A cat yowled somewhere to her left, making her jump. Halvard's house was smaller than she'd expected. More of a cabin, really, set slightly apart from the other dwellings. Smoke rose from the roof, opening, and a dim light showed through the cracks around the door. She knocked once, soft, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The door opened immediately. Halvard must have been waiting, watching. He stepped aside to let her in, and she slipped into the warmth quickly, letting him close the door behind her. The space was simple. A single room with a hearth fire in the center, smoke rising through the opening above. A sleeping bench covered with furs along one wall. A table and 2 chairs. Weapons hung neatly on racks, and a few personal possessions sat on a shelf. No decoration, no softness. The dwelling of a man who lived alone and expected nothing else. "You came," Halvard said, and there was surprise in his voice beneath the pain. "I said I would." Astrid set down the satchel and turned to look at him properly. In the firelight, he looked worse than he had that afternoon. The gray tinge had deepened to almost ashen, and he was leaning heavily against the doorframe. "You need to lie down, on the bench, where I can reach the wound." He moved to comply, lowering himself onto the furs with careful movements. Each breath seemed to cost him now, shallow and controlled. Astrid pulled the table closer and began laying out her supplies. Yarrow leaves, clean linen, the honey, a small knife she'd taken from the kitchen, its blade thin and sharp. "This is going to hurt," she said quietly, kneeling beside the bench. "The stitches need to come out so the wound can drain properly, and I need to clean out the infection. I've endured worse." But his voice was tight. "Have you?" She met his eyes. "Or is that what warriors tell themselves?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps both." Astrid reached for the hem of his tunic. This time there was no hesitation. She lifted it carefully, exposing the angry wound. It looked even worse now, the flesh around it hot and swollen. The red streaks had spread further. If this didn't work, if she couldn't draw out the poison. Don't think about that. Just work. She heated the knife blade in the fire until it glowed faintly, then let it cool just enough to handle. Halvard watched her with those steady eyes, and she wondered what he saw. A frightened thrall playing healer, or something else. "Tell me about her," Astrid said as she positioned the blade at the first stitch. "My mother. What was she like when you met her?" Halvard's eyes widened slightly, understanding her tactic. Talk. Distract. Make the pain something happening at a distance. "She was fierce," he said, and his voice steadied as he reached for the memory. "When I found her trapped under that beam, she wasn't crying or begging. She was angry, furious that she couldn't protect you herself." The first stitch parted under Astrid's blade and his breath hitched, but he kept talking. "She grabbed my arm with such strength, I thought she might break bones. Made me look her in the eyes while she spoke." The second stitch. The third. Thick fluid began to seep from the wound, and the smell intensified. Astrid's stomach churned, but she kept her hands steady. "What else?" she prompted. She made me repeat the oath back to her. 3 times. Had to be sure I meant it. His breathing was faster now, pain breaking through. Then she said you had her stubbornness and your father's kind heart, that you'd need both to survive. The last stitch came free, and the wound opened fully. Fluid poured out, yellowish and foul, and Astrid quickly used clean linen to absorb it, pressing gently around the edges to encourage drainage. Halvard's hand fisted in the furs beneath him, his jaw locked so tight she could see the muscles jumping. But he didn't cry out. The wound drained for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Astrid worked methodically, pressing gently, encouraging the poison to leave his body. Each time fresh fluid appeared, her heart sank a little deeper. So much infection, so deep inside him. But she kept going, kept cleaning, until finally the discharge began to run clearer. "The worst is over," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if she meant the draining or something else entirely. Her hands ached from the careful, constant pressure, and her knees had gone numb against the hard floor. But Halvard's breathing had started to even out, the sharp edges of pain softening into something more bearable. She crushed the yarrow leaves between her palms, releasing their bitter scent, then mixed them with honey until they formed a thick paste. The combination would draw out remaining infection and help the flesh begin to heal. Her mother had taught her this back when the world was different and she'd been learning the skills of a farmer's daughter. Strange how those lessons survived when so much else had been destroyed. "This will sting," she warned, spreading the mixture across the open wound with gentle fingers. Halvard's muscles tensed beneath her. Touch, his breath hissing between clenched teeth, but he stayed still, trusting. The realization made something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerous and wholly inappropriate for a thrall to feel toward a free man. She bound the wound with clean linen, wrapping it snugly around his torso. Her hands lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary, feeling the heat of his skin, the solid strength of him beneath her fingertips. When she finally pulled away, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You should rest now," Astrid said, suddenly very aware of how close they were, how alone, how inappropriate this entire situation would seem to anyone who discovered them. "The body heals better with sleep. Stay." The word came out rough, almost desperate. "Just for a few more minutes. Please." She should leave, should run back to the hall before anyone noticed her absence. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, made her settle back on her heels instead. "What happened to my father?" The question had lived inside her for 7 years, never asked because no one cared enough to answer. "You said my mother mentioned him. Was he... did he... He was already dead when we arrived." Halvard's voice was gentle, sparing her the details she could imagine well enough. "Your mother said he died defending the village, bought time for women and children to hide. She was proud of him, even at the end." Astrid nodded slowly, tears burning behind her eyes. She'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that he might have survived somewhere, been taken as a thrall to a different settlement. But no, both parents gone in fire and violence, leaving her alone at 12 to navigate a world that saw her as property. "I barely remember his face anymore," she whispered. "Isn't that terrible? 7 years and he's fading, like smoke. That's not terrible. That's survival." Halvard's hand moved, hovering for a moment before settling gently on her shoulder. The touch was careful, respectful, but it sent warmth flooding through her. "We forget what we must to keep living. Your mother understood that. It's why she made me promise to protect you, not avenge her. She wanted you to have a future, even if it meant letting go of the past." The weight of his hand on her shoulder felt like an anchor, like something solid in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. Astrid looked up and found his eyes already on her, dark and intense in the firelight. There was pain there still, but something else too, something that made her breath catch. "Halvard," she started, then stopped, unsure what she meant to say. His name felt strange on her tongue after 7 years of silence between them. Strange but right. "I know." His thumb brushed against her collarbone just once, so briefly she might have imagined it. "I know." What did he know? That she was grateful? That she was confused? That somewhere in the space between this afternoon and now, something had shifted inside her, and she couldn't quite name what it was or what it meant. The door burst open. Astrid shot to her feet, heart exploding in her chest. Halvard tried to rise but gasped and fell back, his hand instinctively moving to protect his newly dressed wound. The figure in the doorway took a step inside, and firelight revealed features that made ice flood Astrid's veins. Bjorn. He stood there, swaying slightly, mead-drunk and dangerous. His eyes moved from Astrid to Halvard and back. Again, and she watched something dark and furious bloom across his face. "Well," he said, and his voice was soft in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. "What do we have here?" Astrid's mind raced. Explanations, excuses, anything that might diffuse this. But her tongue felt frozen, her throat closed with terror. "The girl was helping me with an injury," Halvard said, his voice steady despite the pain and surprise. "I asked her to bring supplies from the kitchen. There's nothing improper happening." "Nothing improper?" Bjorn laughed, but there was no humor in it. He stepped fully inside and closed the door behind him with deliberate care. "My bride-to-be, alone in your house, after dark, her hands on your bare skin, and you expect me to believe nothing improper is happening?" "It's the truth," Astrid forced out. "He has a wound that was infected. I was cleaning and dressing it. That's all." "That's all." Bjorn moved closer, and she could smell the mead on him, sour and heavy. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't see the way you look at each other?" "There's nothing," Halvard started, but Bjorn whirled on him. "You." His finger jabbed toward Halvard like a weapon. "You've been watching her for years. I've seen it. Everyone's seen it. The way you hover around her like some pathetic dog. And now, 13 days before she becomes mine, I find you two alone together. Your father promised her freedom through marriage," Halvard said, and there was steel in his voice now despite his weakened state. "That promise hasn't been broken. Nothing dishonest has occurred here. My father isn't here." Bjorn's hand moved to the knife at his belt, fingers curling around the handle. "And I say what's dishonest. I say what happens to things that belong to me." "She doesn't belong to you yet," Astrid heard herself say. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere she didn't recognize, somewhere brave and foolish and tired of being afraid. "For 13 more days. I'm still a thrall of your father's household, not your property." The silence that followed was deadly. Bjorn stared at her like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. Like a dog had suddenly spoken. Then his face twisted into something ugly. "You dare." He took a step toward her, and Astrid's body locked with terror. But suddenly Halvard was there, on his feet despite the pain it must have cost him, positioning himself between them. "Touch her, and you'll answer to your father," Halvard said quietly. "And to me." "You?" Bjorn laughed again, that terrible mirthless sound. "You're dying, Halvard. Everyone knows it. I can smell the rot on you from here. What exactly do you think you can do? Enough to make you regret it." There was no bravado in Halvard's voice, just cold certainty. "I've killed better men than you with worse wounds. Don't test me." The two men stared at each other, and Astrid could feel the violence thrumming in the air between them. One wrong word, one wrong move. Everything would shatter. "Bjorn," a new voice from the doorway. They all turned to find Jarl Eirik standing there, his face carved from stone. "What are you doing here?" "Father, Bjorn's posture shifted immediately, something like a boy caught in wrongdoing. "I was looking for you and saw the girl leaving the hall. I followed to ensure she wasn't meeting someone inappropriately. And instead you found her tending a warrior's wound." Eric's eyes moved to Halvard, taking in his bare torso, the fresh bandaging, the supplies scattered on the table. "Is this true?" "Yes, Jarl." Halvard's voice was respectful but firm. "I took a blade in the last skirmish. The wound festered. I asked the girl to help, as she has skill with healing." Eric's gaze shifted to Astrid, and she felt the weight of it like a physical thing. This man owned her. Had owned her for 7 years. One word from him could end everything. The girl should not be alone with men, especially so close to her. "Wedding," Erik said finally, "but I see no evidence of dishonor here. Bjorn, you will return to the hall. Now. But father, now. Bjorn's jaw worked silently. He looked at Astrid with such hatred that she had to fight not to step back. Then he turned and stormed out, shoving past his father with barely controlled fury. Erik watched him go, then turned back to them. Halvard, you will come to me tomorrow. We need to discuss your condition and your service to this house. His eyes found Astrid. And you, girl. Back to the kitchens. If I find you've been anywhere you shouldn't be again, there will be consequences. Understood? Yes, my lord. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She gathered her satchel with shaking hands, not daring to look at Halvard. But as she moved toward the door, she felt his fingers brush against hers. Just for a heartbeat, just enough to say what words couldn't. Then she was outside in the cold night air, her heart hammering, her mind racing with the certain knowledge that everything had just changed, and not for the better. The next 3 days passed in suffocating tension. Bjorn watched her constantly now, his pale eyes tracking her every movement through the hall. He didn't speak to her, didn't approach her, but the weight of his attention was worse than any words could have been. Astrid felt like a rabbit frozen under a hawk's shadow, waiting for talons to strike. She hadn't seen Halvard since that night. He'd been summoned to Jarl Eirik's private chambers the morning after, and no one seemed to know what was discussed. The warriors spoke in low voices when they thought no one was listening, speculation running wild. Some said Erik was sending him away. Others claimed he'd been stripped of his position for impropriety with the Jarl's property. The word made Astrid's stomach churn every time she heard it. Property. That's what she was, what she'd always been, and in 10 days, she'd transfer from one owner to another like livestock at market. She was scrubbing pots when Inga appeared beside her, moving with unusual quietness. The head cook rarely approached without barking orders first, so Astrid's hands stilled in the wash water. There's someone at the back entrance, Inga said, her voice low and oddly tight. Asking for you. Astrid's heart jumped. Who? Who do you think? Inga's eyes were sharp, knowing. Go, quickly, before someone else notices. And girl, she caught Astrid's wrist as she moved past. Whatever you're doing, whatever this is, be careful. Bjorn's not the forgiving type, and you've got no protection once you're his. The warning should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like confirmation of something she'd already known, deep in her bones. Astrid nodded and slipped through the kitchen toward the servants' entrance, a narrow door used for deliveries and waste removal. Her hands were still damp from the wash water, and she wiped them nervously on her worn dress. Halvard stood, in the shadows just outside, and her breath caught at the sight of him. He looked better, not healthy, not by any measure, but the gray tinge had faded from his skin. He stood straighter, breathed easier. The fever brightness was gone from his eyes, replaced by something clearer, sharper. You're healing, she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. Thanks to you. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The wound is draining cleanly now. The poison is retreating. Your mother taught you well. Pride bloomed warm in her chest, unexpected and precious. When was the last time anyone had praised something she'd done? When had anyone seen her as more than invisible hands that cleaned and served? What did the Jarl say? The question tumbled out before she could stop it. The warriors have been talking, spreading rumors. Erik is a practical man. Halvard glanced around, checking for watchers, then gestured for her to step further into the shadows with him. He knows I'm dying, though perhaps not quite as quickly as before. He's released me from formal service to the household. I'm free to live out my remaining time as I choose. The words should have been celebratory. Freedom was precious among the Norse. But Astrid heard what he wasn't saying in the careful flatness of his tone. And Bjorn was present for the conversation. Halvard's jaw tightened. He argued that I should be exiled for impropriety with his intended bride, that my presence dishonors him. Ice flooded Astrid's veins. What did Erik decide? That Bjorn is young and possessive and seeing threats where none exist, that a dying man poses no danger to anyone. His eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker there. Pain, but not the physical kind. But Astrid, you need to understand. Eric also made it clear that you are to have no further contact with me. If we're found together again, he won't be lenient. You'll be punished severely, and I'll be cast out as outlaw. Regardless of my condition. The words sat heavy between them. No contact. No more stolen conversations. No more, what? Friendship? Was that what this was? Something else she didn't dare name? Then why are you here? She whispered. Why risk it? Halvard reached inside his cloak and pulled out a small, carved wooden figure. A horse, its mane flowing, its legs caught mid-gallop. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every line smooth and purposeful. He pressed it into her hands, and the wood was warm, from being carried against his body. I made this for you. Years ago, actually. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. After the first year of watching over you. You were 13, and I saw you in the courtyard one day, watching the horses during training. You had this look on your face, like you were somewhere else entirely, somewhere free. Astrid stared at the carving, her vision blurring with tears. I don't understand. The oath I made to your mother was to protect you, to keep you alive. Halvard's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. But somewhere in these 7 years, it became more than duty. I watched you survive things that would have broken others. Watched you stay kind when cruelty would have been easier. Watched you become someone extraordinary despite everything trying to crush you. Halvard, her voice cracked around his name. I'm not declaring love. He said it firmly, like he needed to be clear. I'm too old for you, and I'm dying besides. This isn't some romantic fool's tale. But I need you to know that you matter. That someone sees you, truly sees you, not as a thrall or property, but as a person of value and strength. And when you're Bjorn's wife, when it gets hard, and it will get hard, I want you to remember that, to hold on to who you are. The tears spilled over now, hot against her cold cheeks. She wanted to say so many things, that he wasn't too old, that dying didn't make him less worthy, that these past few days had felt more real than the previous 7 years combined. But the words tangled in her throat, too big and too dangerous to speak aloud. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. For a moment he went rigid with surprise. Then his arms came around her, holding her with such careful tenderness that it made her heart ache. Thank you, she whispered against the rough wool of his cloak. For everything. For keeping your promise. For seeing me. For... She couldn't finish. Couldn't name what this was. Astrid. His voice rumbled through his chest, and she felt his chin rest gently on top of her head. If things were different. If I had more time. If you weren't promised. If we were... He stopped. Started again. You deserve better than what's waiting for you. You deserve someone who sees your worth, who treats you with gentleness, who... Stop. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. Don't make this harder. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb, brushing away tears. The gesture was so tender, so careful, that it hurt worse than any cruelty could have. Because this was what she couldn't have. This gentleness, this respect, this seeing. There's something else, Halvard said, and his tone shifted into something more urgent. Bjorn is planning something. I don't know what, but I've seen him talking with some of the younger warriors, men loyal to him rather than his father. They keep looking at you when they think no one's watching. Fear spiked through her. What kind of something? I don't know, but be careful. More careful than you've ever been. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. Stay visible. Stay where others can see you. His grip on her shoulders tightened slightly. Promise me. I promise. The words felt flimsy against the weight of his concern. But Halvard, you need to be careful too. If Bjorn is planning something and you're in his way, I'm already dying. What more can he do? But there was no humor in the words. Just grim acceptance. Astrid heard voices from inside the kitchen. Someone was coming. They both froze, and Halvard's hand dropped from her face. "Go," he said urgently, "before they find us together." She clutched the carved horse to her chest and backed toward the door. But she couldn't make herself look away from him, from the man who'd kept a dying woman's promise and somehow become something more than just a guardian. "Halvard," she said, his name feeling precious on her tongue. "The healing. You need to change the dressing daily. Reapply the yarrow and honey mixture. Keep the wound clean and dry. Promise me you'll do it properly." Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe, that she was giving him instructions she couldn't deliver herself. That this might be the last time they spoke. "I promise," he said quietly. "And Astrid, the thing meets in 9 days to formalize your marriage. If you need anything before then, if there's any danger, you leave a stone on the back step of this entrance. I'll be watching." Then he was gone, melting into the shadows like he'd never been there. Astrid turned and slipped back into the kitchen's heat, the carved horse hidden in the folds of her dress. Her hands were shaking, and her heart felt like it was tearing in two. 9 days. The number echoed in her mind like a countdown to execution. The stone sat heavy in Astrid's palm, smooth and cold. 3 days. 3 days until the thing. Until her life became Bjorn's to control completely. And something had happened that made every instinct scream danger. It started that morning when Inga sent her to fetch water from the well. A simple errand, one she'd done 1,000 times. But as she crossed the courtyard, 4 of Bjorn's closest companions had appeared from nowhere, forming a loose circle around her. They didn't touch her, didn't speak, just watched with smiles that made her skin crawl. When she tried to move past them, they shifted to block her path. A game. They were playing with her like cats with a cornered mouse. Then Bjorn himself had appeared, his hand falling heavy on her shoulder. "Careful, boys. Don't damage what's mine." His fingers had dug in hard enough to bruise, hard enough to make her gasp. Yet, the word had hung in the air like a threat, and his friends had laughed. She'd pulled away and run, their laughter following her across the courtyard. Back in the kitchen, her hands had shaken so badly she'd dropped the water bucket twice. Inga had looked at her with those knowing eyes, but said nothing, just pointed toward the vegetables that needed chopping. Now, hours later, Astrid stood at the back entrance in the dying light, the stone clutched in her hand. Halvard had said to leave it on the step if she needed him. But what could he do? He was healing, yes, but still weak, still dying, just more slowly. And if they were caught together again, the consequences would be catastrophic for both of them. But the fear was bigger than reason. The way Bjorn had looked at her today wasn't just possessiveness. It was ownership already claimed, rules already broken in his mind. 3 more days felt like an eternity and no time at all. She set the stone on the step and retreated inside, her heart hammering. An hour later, she was in the storage room organizing dried herbs when she heard the soft knock. 3 taps, so quiet she almost missed them. Astrid's breath caught. She moved to the door and cracked it open. Halvard stood in the shadows, his face grave. "What happened?" she told him. The words tumbled out in a rushed whisper. Bjorn's friends surrounding her, the way they'd blocked her path, the threat hidden in his touch. As she spoke, she watched Halvard's expression darken, his jaw setting harder with each detail. "He's testing boundaries," Halvard said when she finished. "Seeing how much he can get away with before the marriage is official. Asserting dominance." His hand curled into a fist, and his father isn't here to see it. Eric left this morning for a neighboring settlement to negotiate trade agreements. He won't be back until the day before the thing. The news hit Astrid like a blow. Eric was the only restraint on his son's behavior. Without him, Bjorn was essentially in charge of the household, and she had no protection whatsoever. "I need to tell you something." Halvard's voice was tight, controlled in a way that suggested barely contained emotion. "I've been asking questions, quietly, about Bjorn and his friends, about what they do when they think no one important is watching. What did you find?" Astrid's voice came out smaller than she intended. "He's cruel, Astrid. Not just impulsive or rough like some young warriors. Deliberately cruel. There was a thrall girl 2 years ago, before you were promised to him. She disappeared one night. The official story was she ran away, tried to escape, and probably died in the wilderness. But some of the older servants remember seeing bruises on her before she vanished, hearing her cry in the night. The cold storage room suddenly felt colder. Astrid wrapped her arms around herself, but it did nothing to stop the shaking that started deep in her bones. I can't marry him. The words broke free, raw and desperate. I can't. I won't survive it. I know. Halvard stepped closer, his presence solid and warm in the dim space. I've been thinking about this, about options, about what's possible. What? Options? Astrid looked up at him, and something in her chest cracked at the pain and determination warring in his eyes. I'm a thrall. I have no rights, no choices. In 3 days I become his wife, and that's the end of it. Unless you're not here when the thing meets. The words hung between them, dangerous and impossible. Astrid stared at him, her mind racing to catch up with what he was suggesting. You mean run? Her voice was barely a whisper. Become outlaw. I mean survive. Halvard's hands came up to grip her shoulders, gentle but urgent. Listen to me. I have a friend, a trader who owes me a life debt. He's leaving for Iceland in 4 days, just after the thing would conclude. Iceland is new territory, settled by Norsemen, but distant enough that your past wouldn't matter. You could start over there. Be free in truth, not just in name. As an outlaw. The reality of it crashed over her. Hunted. If anyone from this settlement ever found me, they won't. Iceland is weeks. Away by ship, and it's vast. You could disappear into one of the new settlements, take a new name. My friend would vouch for you. Say you're a free woman from his homeland seeking opportunity. Astrid's thoughts spun. Freedom. Real freedom. Not the mockery of it that came with marrying Bjorn, but the cost. Living always looking over her shoulder, never truly safe, knowing that discovery meant death or worse. What about you? The question came out before she could stop it. If I run and they discover you helped me, I told you, I'm already dying. His voice was steady, but she saw the lie in his eyes, saw that the healing had given him more time than either of them had expected, maybe months instead of weeks. And I'd rather die knowing I saved you than live knowing I handed you over to a monster. Stop saying that. Astrid's hands came up to grip his arms, feeling the solid strength of him. Stop talking about dying like it's already done. You're healing. The wound is closing. You have time. Not enough time. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. Not enough time for what I wish I had, but enough to make sure you're safe. That's what matters. Astrid felt tears burning behind her eyes again. This man, this silent guardian who'd become something she couldn't name and couldn't have, who was offering her freedom at the cost of his own safety, maybe his own life, and acting like it was simple mathematics. Come with me, the words burst out, desperate and foolish. To Iceland. You said your friend owes you a debt. Surely he'd take us both. You could heal there, away from this place, away from, and tie you to a dying man. Halvard's voice was soft but firm. Saddle you with caring for someone who'll be gone in months regardless. That's not freedom, Astrid. That's just a different kind of cage. Maybe I want that cage. She was crying now, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. Maybe I'd rather have months. With someone who sees me than years, with someone who'll destroy me. His eyes closed, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Don't say that. Don't make this harder than it already is. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and they stood there breathing the same air, separated by inches and impossibilities. You deserve a full life. Marriage, children, growing old. All the things I can't give you. I don't want those things with Bjorn. I know. His voice cracked. God help me, I know. They stood there in the darkness, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. Astrid could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Halvard's breath warm against her face. It would be so easy to close that last distance, to press her lips to his and claim one moment of something real before everything shattered. But that would make leaving impossible, would make the choice even more unbearable. The ship leaves at Eng.
Dawn, 4 days from now, Halvard said finally, pulling back just enough to look at her properly. Meet my friend at the southern dock before the sun rises. He'll be waiting. Tell him Halvard sent you, and he'll take you to safety. And you? I'll create a distraction. Make sure no one looks for you until you're long gone. His hand slid down to grip hers, squeezing gently. Promise me you'll go. Promise me you won't throw away this chance out of misplaced loyalty or whatever else you might feel. Astrid wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to demand he come with her or figure out some impossible third option where they both survived and stayed together. But she looked at his face, at the determination and pain and desperate hope there, and knew he'd already decided. Had probably decided days ago and been waiting for the right moment to tell her. I promise, she whispered. But Halvard, if anything happens to you because of this, then I'll die having done something that matters. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and tried to memorize the sound, the feel of him, the way his chin rested on top of her head, all the small details she'd need to carry with her into whatever came next. 3 days, he murmured into her hair. Just survive 3 more days. Can you do that? Astrid nodded against his chest, not trusting her voice. 3 days until the thing. 4 until freedom. A lifetime until she stopped missing the man who'd saved her twice, once from fire, once from a different kind of burning. The day of the thing dawned gray and cold, frost coating every surface like the world itself had frozen in anticipation. Astrid woke before the other thralls, her body wound tight with tension. Today, everything would happen today. The thing would convene at midday. Bjorn would formally claim her as his bride, and tonight, if Halvard's plan worked, she would disappear into darkness and toward a ship that promised freedom. She dressed in the best clothes she owned, still worn and simple, but clean. Her fingers trembled as she braided her hair, the same way her mother had taught her a lifetime ago. The carved wooden horse sat hidden in a small pouch tied at her waist, pressed against her skin like a talisman, like a promise. The hall was chaos that morning. Jarl Eirik had returned the night before, and preparations for the thing consumed everyone's attention. The gathering would be held in the great meadow beyond the settlement, where disputes were settled and oaths were sworn and justice was dispensed according to ancient law. Astrid moved through the familiar tasks, serving breakfast, clearing dishes, staying invisible, while her mind counted down the hours. 8 hours until the ceremony, 14 hours until midnight, 16 hours until she needed to reach the southern dock before dawn. Bjorn watched her throughout the morning meal, his eyes tracking her every movement. But there was something different in his gaze today, something almost victorious, like a hunter who'd already caught his prey and was simply waiting to claim it. The look made her skin crawl, but she kept her face carefully neutral. Just a few more hours. She could endure a few more hours. Astrid. Inga's voice cut through her thoughts. The head cook stood near the kitchen entrance, her weathered face unusually soft. Come here, girl. Astrid crossed to her, wondering what task would be assigned now. But instead of orders, Inga pressed something into her hand, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Food for traveling, Inga said quietly, so low that only Astrid could hear. Dried meat, hard cheese, flatbread, enough for several days, if you're careful. Astrid's heart stuttered. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Inga's sharp eyes met hers with unexpected kindness. I've been cooking in this hall for 30 years. I see things. I hear things. And I know the look of someone planning to run. She pressed the bundle more firmly into Astrid's hands.
I also know what Bjorn is, what he'll do to you if you stay. Tears burned behind Astrid's eyes. If they discover you helped me, I'm old and useful. They won't punish me severely. Besides, I can claim ignorance. Say you stole the food. Inga's hand came up to cup Astrid's cheek briefly. Your mother would be proud of you, surviving this long, staying kind despite everything. Go with the God's blessing, child.
And don't look back. Before Astrid could respond, Inga turned and barked at another servant about the bread burning. But the bundle stayed warm in Astrid's hands, heavy with more than just food, heavy with unexpected mercy. The hours crawled and raced simultaneously. Noon arrived and the household began moving toward the meadow. Astrid was pulled along in the current of people, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The Thing grounds were already crowded, not just Eirik's household, but people from neighboring farms and settlements all gathered to witness the proceedings. The assembly began with other business first, a land dispute between farmers, a theft accusation requiring judgment. Astrid stood at the back with the other thralls and servants, trying to stay small, trying to be invisible, but she felt Halvard's presence before she saw him. He stood with the warriors, his posture straight, despite the wound she knew still pained him. Their eyes met. Across the crowd, and something passed between them. Courage. Farewell. Things too big for words. Then Jarl Eirik raised his hand, calling for silence. We come now to a matter of celebration. His voice carried across the meadow. My son Bjorn comes of age to lead, to build a household, to continue our line. 7 years ago, we took a thrall girl named Astrid as part of a raid. I promised her freedom when she reached her 20th year, and today that promise is fulfilled. She will marry my, son, gaining the status of free woman and wife. The crowd murmured approval. This was how it was done. How thralls could sometimes earn their freedom. Through service, through marriage, through the mercy of their owners. It was supposed to be an honor. Bring forth the girl, Eirik commanded. Astrid's legs felt like water as she was pushed forward through the crowd. She kept her eyes down, her hands clasped in front of her, every muscle locked against the urge to run right now, in front of everyone. But that would be madness. They'd catch her in seconds. She had to wait, had to play the role just a few more hours. Bjorn stepped forward to meet her, and his hand closed around her wrist like an iron shackle. He pulled her to stand beside him before the assembly, his grip tight enough to make her bones ache. Before the gods in this assembly, I claim Astrid as my wife. Bjorn's voice rang out. What was thrall becomes free. What was separate becomes mine. Let any who would challenge this speak now. Silence. No one would challenge a Jarl's son. No one would risk that kind of conflict over a thrall girl. Astrid's throat closed. This was it, the moment where her fate was sealed. I challenge it. The voice cut through the silence like a blade. Everyone turned, and Astrid's heart stopped as Halvard stepped forward from the ranks of warriors. No, this wasn't the plan. He was supposed to create a distraction later, after she'd left. Not now. Not like this. On what grounds? Eirik's voice was dangerous, controlled. On the grounds that the girl has the right to refuse. Halvard's voice was steady, carrying across the meadow. She is being freed. A free woman has the right to decline marriage if she chooses. That is our law. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He was right. Technically right. A free woman could refuse a marriage proposal. But a thrall being offered freedom through marriage refusing that offer. It was unheard of, insulting. The girl hasn't refused. Bjorn snarled, his grip on Astrid's wrist tightening until she gasped. She stands here willingly. Does she? Halvard's eyes found Astrid's. Astrid, daughter of Freya, do you accept this marriage of your own free will? Every eye turned to her. The weight of their attention was crushing. Astrid looked at Halvard, saw the desperation and determination in his face. He was giving her a choice. Here, now, in front of everyone, forcing the issue into the light where it couldn't be ignored. But if she refused, There would be consequences. For her, for him, for anyone who'd helped her. This wasn't the careful escape plan. This was chaos. This was burning every bridge and hoping you could swim. She looked at Bjorn's face, saw the rage building there, saw the promise of what would come if she said yes. Years of cruelty, of being owned more completely than she'd ever been as a thrall, of slowly dying inside until nothing remained. Then she looked at Halvard, at the man who'd kept his promise for 7 years, who'd stayed silent to protect her, who'd offered his own safety to give her freedom, who'd taught her that she was worth seeing, worth fighting for. Astrid pulled her wrist from Bjorn's grip. The movement took all her strength, all her courage. She stepped back, away from him, and faced the assembly. "I refuse," she said. Her voice shook but carried. "I do not accept this marriage." The meadow exploded into chaos. Bjorn lunged for her, but Halvard was faster, stepping between them. Eirik was shouting for order. The crowd pressed closer, everyone trying to see, to hear, to witness this unprecedented moment. "You ungrateful!" Bjorn's face was purple with rage. "I offer you freedom, status, and you dare refuse me?" "She has the right," Halvard said, his voice cutting through the noise. "As a free woman, she has the right to choose her own path. That is our law, Jarl Eirik. Will you honor it?" All eyes turned to Eirik. The Jarl stood rigid, his face carved from stone. Man who prided himself on honoring tradition, on following law, but also a father watching his son be publicly humiliated. The silence stretched. Astrid's heart hammered so hard she thought she might faint. Everything balanced on this moment, on whether a powerful man would choose law over pride. "The law is clear," Eirik said finally, each word seeming to cost him. "A free woman may refuse marriage. The girl is free to go." "Father, you can't," Bjorn started, but Eirik silenced him with a look. "She is free," he repeated, and the words fell like a judgment. "But understand, girl, you refuse this offer. You refuse my household's protection. You will leave here with nothing but the clothes you wear. No shelter, no food, no support. And if you are found within our lands after sunset today, you will be treated as trespasser and thief. Do you understand?" Astrid nodded, not trusting her voice. Exile. She was being exiled, but alive. Free. "Go," Eirik commanded. "Before I change my mind." Astrid turned to run, but Halvard caught her arm. For one brief moment, his hand squeezed hers. A goodbye, a blessing, a promise kept. Then he released her, and she ran. She ran past the shocked crowd, past the settlement buildings, ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed. She didn't stop until she reached the forest edge, where she finally collapsed against a tree, sobbing with terror and relief and grief. She'd done it. She was free, and she'd left behind the only person who'd ever truly seen her, knowing she'd likely never see him again. The sun was setting when she finally reached the southern dock. The trader's ship sat waiting, just as Halvard had promised. An older man with kind eyes helped her aboard when she whispered Halvard's name. "He said you'd come," the trader said to take you somewhere new, somewhere safe. As the ship pulled away from shore, Astrid stood at the rail and looked back at the settlement one last time. She couldn't see Halvard from this distance. Couldn't know if he was safe, if Bjorn had retaliated, if the wound had reopened from the stress of confrontation. But she was free. Her mother had told her to be brave, and today she finally understood what that meant. Not enduring, not surviving, but choosing, fighting, refusing to accept that some chains were simply meant to be worn. Years later in Iceland, Astrid would build a life, not as someone's property or someone's wife, but as herself. She'd tell Halvard's story to those who'd listen, the warrior who kept his promise, who gave a frightened girl the courage to save herself. And she'd keep the carved wooden horse until her dying day, a reminder of the man who'd taught her that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to surrender who you are. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't fighting back. It's refusing to accept the chains others insist we're meant to wear. Astrid's story reminds us that freedom isn't always given. Sometimes it must be claimed, even when the cost feels unbearable. She could have chosen safety, accepted the brutal marriage, survived by making herself smaller and quieter until nothing remained of who she truly was. Instead, she chose the terrifying unknown. She chose herself. What would you have done, standing in that meadow with every eye upon you? Would you have found the courage to say no when yes seemed like the only option? Would you have run toward freedom, knowing you'd leave behind the one person who saw your worth? Halvard kept his promise to a dying mother for 7 years, protecting a frightened child who grew into a woman of extraordinary strength. He gave her the greatest gift one person can offer another, not rescue, but the courage to rescue herself. His story teaches us that love isn't always about possession or happily ever after. Sometimes it's about stepping back, creating space, giving someone the tools they need to build their own future, even when you can't be part of it. In the end, both of them chose something harder than surrender. They chose dignity. They chose truth. They chose the kind of bravery that echoes across generations. If this story moved you, if it made you think about courage and choice and what it means to truly see another person, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity, our capacity for both cruelty and extraordinary kindness. And tell us in the comments, what would you have chosen? Thank you for listening. Until next time, may you always find the courage to choose yourself.